Before we dive into today's story, if you love powerful HFY tales where humanity's heart outshines the stars, hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite moment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Now, let's begin. The moon's surface was still burning when Elias Ward stepped off the medical skimmer. Smoke bled upward into the star-pocked night, swallowing the scattered lights of the crashed refugee vessel. The air was thin but stank of scorched metal, coolant, and something stranger, something alive. He adjusted the filter on his respirator, boots crunching over glass sand as search beacons swept the wreckage. They had told him this was just a cleanup. A mop-up for survivors the alien coalition didn't have time to collect. But even in the way the soldier-turned-tech had been briefed, hurriedly without detail, he sensed something was off. The coalition didn't abandon their own, not officially. He found the first survivors gathered at the edge of the crash site, tall, slate-skinned figures with narrow, angled faces and reflective pupils that gleamed like blades. They moved with mechanical precision, organizing their wounded. Elias had worked with their kind before. Efficiency was their religion. Compassion was not. A medic among them approached, silver robes singed black at the edges. "Human," she said in a clipped voice, her translator implant rendering her tone in perfect, cold English. "Triage complete. Extraction shuttle will depart in 13 minutes. Elias frowned, scanning the half-collapsed transport. "What about the others still inside?" "There are none we will retrieve," she replied without hesitation. "Resources are prioritized." Her eyes shifted briefly toward the wreck. It was the smallest glance, but it told him everything. Someone was still in there, and they had already decided that someone didn't matter. He pushed past her before she could protest. Heat pressed against him as he forced his way through twisted bulkheads, stepping over cracked canisters and motionless bodies. He had seen battlefields before, but this kind of clinical abandonment unsettled him more than any war zone. A sound drew him deeper, a faint, uneven breath. Not human. Not machine. Living. Elias ducked under a hanging support beam, his flashlight trembling against the dark, until the beam found her. She was small for her kind, barely more than a girl. Pale gray skin smeared with ash, a soft violet sheen along her temples where luminous veins pulsed weakly. She lay half-buried beneath a collapsed medical pod, her legs twisted unnaturally. Her eyes, wide, liquid silver, locked onto him with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He dropped to his knees beside her, lifting the beam with a grunt. She didn't scream. Her breathing hitched, shallow but steady. The lower half of her body didn't move at all. A thin, pulsating line on her chest monitor confirmed what his medic training already told him. Spinal trauma. Paralysis. "It's okay," Elias said softly, even though she wouldn't understand. His voice had always been steady when the situation wasn't. "You're not alone anymore." Her fingers twitched, hesitant, reaching toward him as if testing whether he was real. He clasped them gently. Her skin was colder than the metal around her. Outside, the engines of the alien extraction shuttle began to hum, a low, final warning. Elias swung his comm to his mouth. "Control, I've got a live one here. Critical condition. Requesting medevac priority." Pause. Then a flat voice. "Ward, that's a Cathary. Coalition declared non-recoverable status on all impaired units. Extraction vessel is sealed. Do not engage." His jaw clenched. "She's breathing." "Then she'll die breathing," the voice replied, and the line clicked dead. Elias stared at the comm unit, his pulse drumming in his ears. He'd seen soldiers left behind before. Not like this. Not by their own. He looked back at her. The girl was still watching him. Her breathing was a frightened staccato. Something in her gaze, something too human, burned against the cold logic of the orders he'd just heard. A shadow filled the ruined doorway. The alien medic stood there, unflinching. "You will not change her outcome, human. She is non-functional. Her removal would burden evacuation resources. She has accepted this." Elias glanced at the girl. Her lips trembled. No, she hadn't accepted anything. She had just been told she didn't matter. He pushed himself up slowly, squaring his shoulders. Then maybe she deserves someone who disagrees. The medic tilted her head, expression unreadable. "Do as you will. Her expiration will be quick. Perhaps that is mercy." She turned and left, as if walking away from a piece of discarded equipment. Elias exhaled, hot and sharp, then crouched again. "Hey," he murmured to the girl. She didn't understand the words, but his tone cut through the noise of burning metal. "I'm not leaving you." He pulled the field harness from his back, slid his arms beneath her carefully. She winced but didn't resist. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel the tremor in her chest, the quiet panic she couldn't voice. He stepped into the night as the alien shuttle began to lift off. Its thrusters roared overhead, bathing the crash site in pale blue fire. Not one of them looked back. The wind whipped across the barren flats, tugging at his jacket. Behind him, the ship grew smaller until it vanished into the stars, carrying away a people who had chosen efficiency over mercy. He glanced down at her. Her head rested against his shoulder now, silver eyes still wide open. Ash streaked across her cheeks like war paint. "Yeah," he muttered. "Screw them too." He adjusted his grip and started the long walk toward the colony's outer gates. Each step sank into the ashy soil, leaving a trail behind them, proof that at least one person refused to erase her. Halfway to the ridge, her hand moved again, brushing lightly against the collar of his jacket. It wasn't a plea. It was a question. Why? He met her gaze and spoke evenly. "Because you're still here." Her breathing steadied a little after that. When he reached the gate, the sentry on duty stared at the bundle in his arms, confused. "Ward, what the hell is that?" "Someone who's not dead yet," Elias said. "She's alien. The Coalition left her to die," he finished sharply. "We're not them." The sentry hesitated, then thumbed the entry panel open. Elias carried her through the pressure lock and into the colony dome. It wasn't a hospital and he wasn't a doctor anymore, but there were things he could do. A bed. A chance. That was more than she'd been given by her own. She didn't speak during the walk through the corridors, though her eyes followed every light, every sound. The way she clutched his sleeve was small, fragile, but steady. A quiet pact between strangers. When Elias finally laid her on the med table in his cramped workshop, her eyes blinked slowly, adjusting to the warm light. Her breathing had calmed. She was safe for now. He leaned against the wall, watching the pulse monitor stabilize, the faintest color returning to her lips. She wasn't supposed to have survived. She wasn't supposed to matter. But she did. Outside, the night wind scraped across the colony's shell. In here, for the first time in what must have felt like forever, she wasn't alone. Elias didn't know who she was. He didn't know why the Coalition had abandoned her. But one thing was certain. They'd made a mistake. Because humanity didn't leave people behind. Not anymore. And as the girl drifted into exhausted sleep, Elias sat beside her, jaw set, already knowing that by picking her up tonight, he'd just declared war on an entire way of thinking. The kind of war he was more than willing to fight. The girl didn't move for 2 full days. Elias kept her alive with the same stubborn precision that had once saved soldiers on distant battlefields. He patched together medtech salvaged from the colony's scrap reserves. Old monitors, a cracked infusion pump, and a worn portable biobed whose diagnostics barely worked. The room smelled of antiseptic and burnt circuitry, a scent he knew too well. Outside, the colony dome buzzed with its usual dull rhythm, but inside his workshop the world had shrunk to a single breathing alien girl and the faint hum of recycled air. She didn't speak. Not that she could, not yet. Her language and his were 2 entirely different species of sound. But her eyes followed everything. The flick of a switch, the way he tightened the band around her arm, the way he exhaled after each procedure. She was learning him even without words. On the 3rd morning, when he returned with a tray of nutrient gel packs and a heat blanket, he found her awake. Really awake this time. Her silver eyes were clearer, alert and guarded. She tried to push herself up, but her lower body refused. A short, strangled sound left her throat. It wasn't quite a scream, more like a noise of frustration crushed by exhaustion. "Hey, easy," Elias said, raising his hands slightly. His voice came out softer than he expected. "You're safe. Just breathe." She stilled, watching him like a cornered animal deciding whether to trust the hand reaching toward it. He took a step closer, careful not to move too fast. Her breathing hitched but didn't spike into panic. Progress. Elias gently lifted the blanket and adjusted the support under her back. She flinched but didn't pull away. Her body was bruised and bandaged, but the damage below her waist was clear, too much for a field medic to fix. Her spine had been snapped like a branch. He could keep her alive. He couldn't make her walk. Not yet. He held up one of the heat packs and tapped his chest. Warm. Then he placed it against her shoulder. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to his face. Slowly, almost uncertainly, she nodded. It wasn't understanding so much as acceptance. Elias pulled over a chair and sat down, exhaustion carving lines deeper into his face. "You know," he murmured, "most people would have let you go." He didn't expect her to understand. He needed to hear it himself. They would have walked away. But, that's not who I am. Her gaze lingered on him longer this time. There was something in it, a silent question, a fragile tether forming between strangers who didn't share a language but shared something more primal, the need not to be alone. Later that day the colony's comm system crackled overhead. A flat, official voice announced new restrictions regarding alien refugees. No unauthorized contact. No personal harboring. Elias muted the speaker before it could finish. He didn't need the reminder. He knew he was already breaking half a dozen regulations by keeping her here. But when he turned back to her, saw how she shrank slightly at the sound of the announcement, he also knew he wouldn't stop. Her hand twitched toward her own chest. She made a soft sound like two syllables wrapped in air. Elias leaned forward. She tried again, struggling with breath and pain. Kareth. Kareth? Elias repeated carefully. She blinked, surprised. He tilted his head. That your name? She tapped her collarbone once, firm. He nodded. Kareth it is. Then after a moment he added softly, I'm Elias. He pressed his hand against his chest. Elias. Her brows drew together, lips moving around the unfamiliar shape of the sound. Elias. He smiled despite himself. It was a cracked, tired smile but real. The next few days bled into a quiet routine. Elias worked odd shifts at the maintenance yards to keep suspicion low, then spent every free hour tending to her. He rebuilt a crude brace for her legs from scavenged servos and carbon fiber panels. He taught her gestures, pointing to things, naming them slowly. She picked up faster than he expected. She was sharp, too sharp to be the broken thing her people had abandoned. Sometimes at night, when the generators outside went quiet and the colony lights dimmed, she would stare at the ceiling for hours, lips pressed tight as if trying to hold back a storm. She didn't cry. Not once. Elias recognized that kind of silence. It wasn't peace. It was survival. On the seventh night, when a cold front swept across the dome, he found her shivering despite the heating unit. He draped his own jacket over her. It hung awkwardly on her frame, but she clutched it with both hands as if it were armor. You're tougher than they gave you credit for, he muttered. She looked at him then, not guarded, not afraid. Just looking. It wasn't trust yet, but it was close. Word was starting to spread through the colony. Someone had seen him carrying a shape through the gates that night. Someone else had asked too many questions at the supply depot. He caught the whispers, the sidelong glances. Humans might not be her people, but they weren't his allies either. One evening, as he changed out the fluid line on her med unit, she reached out and touched his forearm lightly. The gesture was awkward but deliberate. She didn't need to say it. He understood. Thank you. Elias covered her hand with his. Don't thank me. Just live. Her lips pressed together in a thin line, and she gave the smallest nod he'd seen. It was enough. Outside, the colony's external alarms blared once, a test signal. In a few weeks, maybe less, someone in authority would come asking about her. He could feel the clock ticking behind every quiet moment they shared. But when he looked at her now, Kareth, the girl who'd been left to die, he saw something else forming in the spaces between words and wounds. A stubborn spark. A will to stay. A mirror of his own defiance. The night stretched on, and for the first time since pulling her out of the wreck, he didn't feel like he was just keeping someone alive. He felt like he was standing at the beginning of something dangerous and irrevocable. Kareth drifted to sleep, clutching his jacket like a shield. Elias sat in the dark beside her, jaw tight, knowing there would be consequences for everything he was doing. He'd faced worse. He'd fought worse. But this was different. This time he wasn't just fighting for himself. And outside the thin walls of the workshop, the colony hummed with rumors he couldn't ignore much longer. The first knock came before sunrise. Elias was half awake, sitting at his workbench with a soldering tool still warm in his hand, when the sound jolted through the quiet of the dome. It wasn't the cautious tap of a neighbor. It was a controlled, deliberate strike. The kind made by someone who expected to be obeyed. Kareth stirred on the cot, blinking against the dim workshop light. Her hand clenched the edge of his jacket, still draped over her thin shoulders. The fear wasn't visible in her face. She'd learned how to bury that, but he saw the tightness in her jaw. Elias set the tool down and moved to the door. His reflection in the steel panel looked older than he remembered, more like the soldier he used to be than the mechanic he pretended to be now. He opened the door. Two uniformed officers stood on the threshold. Between them, in his dark gray overcoat and polished boots, was Commander Vale. Tall, broad-shouldered, and carved from something colder than iron, Vale didn't waste time with courtesy. His gaze swept the interior of the workshop with quiet precision, the kind of look that measured everything and missed nothing. "Ward," he said evenly. "We need to talk." Elias didn't move aside. "Then talk." Vale's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. Inside. The commander walked past him without waiting for permission. His officers followed. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Kareth had pushed herself upright against the wall, her pale fingers gripping the rail of the cot. She was alert, silent, her silver eyes flicking from face to face like an animal searching for escape routes. Vale stopped a few feet from her. His expression didn't change. "Well," he murmured, "the rumors weren't exaggerated." Elias closed the door behind them, slow and deliberate. "She's injured. She's not a threat." Vale turned to him with a measured look. "That isn't the point. You know the directive. Unauthorized alien refugees are to be turned over to central processing for classification." "Classification," Elias repeated. The word tasted bitter. "You mean detention. Or dissection." The officers shifted at his tone, but Vale didn't flinch. Their coalition abandoned her. She's not under anyone's protection now. That makes her property of the colonial administration until further notice. Kareth's breathing quickened. She didn't understand the language, not fully, but she understood enough. Elias took a step between her and the commander. "She's a person," he said. "Not a crate of salvage." Vale raised an eyebrow, as if amused by the naivety of the statement. "She's an enemy species. She's a child." "Exactly." The commander's voice sharpened, clean and dangerous. "A liability. A weakness." For a moment the room held its breath. The officers waited for Elias to fold, to move aside like a man who understood how the system worked. But Elias wasn't built for that kind of obedience. He'd spent years breaking himself into pieces for wars that decided who lived and who got thrown away. He'd promised himself he'd never follow blind orders again. "She stays with me," Elias said. Vale's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes flickered, a small spark of annoyance. "This isn't your choice." "Then you're going to have to drag me out of the way," Elias replied quietly. One of the officers shifted his weight, but Vale lifted a hand and stilled him. He studied Elias for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You're a good man, Ward. Useful. Don't make yourself a problem." "I already am one." The silence stretched, sharp as a blade. Then Vale lowered his hand and turned toward the door. "Fine," he said. "For now. But understand this, when command decides they won't ask for your permission. And when they come, they'll come with more than 2 men." The door hissed open, then shut again, leaving the workshop steeped in a heavier quiet than before. Elias exhaled slowly. Kareth was staring at him. Her brow furrowed, eyes shining under the dim lights. She didn't have the words, but she didn't need them. She knew enough to understand that something dangerous had just been set in motion. He crossed the room and crouched beside her. "They'll come back," he said softly. She tilted her head, not catching the words but reading his face. He pressed a hand to his chest. "Me." Then to the door. "Them?" He shook his head. "No." Her hand reached out slowly, uncertain, then rested on his wrist. A question trembled there. "I won't hand you over," he whispered. The tension in her shoulders eased just slightly. But the fear didn't vanish. Fear never did. In the days that followed, the colony changed. Not in ways that showed up on announcements or broadcasts, but in the air itself. Conversations stopped when Elias walked into the mess hall. Neighbors who used to greet him began to look away. The rumor that he was hiding at Ketheri spread faster than truth ever could. Some whispered that the alien was a spy. Others called her a disease. Someone scratched "traitor" onto the wall outside his quarters. He didn't bother cleaning it. It wasn't worth pretending anymore. At night he started locking the door. He installed an old security sensor on the roof and repositioned his workshop lights so they could be killed in an instant. Kareth watched him work with quiet focus, mimicking some of his gestures, learning. She didn't ask why. She already knew. One evening he brought her a cup of warmed nutrient broth. She cupped it between her hands and stared at the faint steam rising. When he turned to leave, she spoke softly. "Elias." He paused. She pointed at herself. "Kareth." Then at him again. "Elias." Her voice trembled but held. Elias smiled faintly. "Yeah. Elias." Her gaze lingered. Then she lifted her chin slightly as if trying to look braver than she felt. Her hand brushed the rail of her cot, mimicking a gesture he used when steadying himself. It wasn't just gratitude. It was trust. Outside, the colony lights dimmed into night, but the world beyond their small room was anything but still. Vale hadn't given up. Neither had the people who feared what they didn't understand. Elias leaned back against the workbench, listening to the quiet hum of the life support units. He could almost feel the storm gathering beyond the dome walls, quiet but certain. He had made a choice, one he couldn't undo. Kareth sipped the broth slowly, silver eyes reflecting the dull glow of the workshop lights. She had been abandoned once. He could see the memory of it flicker behind every careful movement she made. And now, for reasons he didn't fully understand, she had chosen to trust him. He exhaled, steadying the knot in his chest. Whatever came next, he would not let them take her. In that dim, quiet room, surrounded by rusted tools and flickering equipment, Elias Ward finally accepted the shape of the war he was walking into. It wouldn't be fought on a battlefield. It would be fought here, in the shadows of the colony, between a man who refused to bend and a system that never asked for permission to break what it feared. And the next time someone came knocking, he knew it wouldn't just be a warning. The first time Kareth stood on her own feet again, the floor shook beneath her. Not because of her weight, she was slight, almost delicate, but because Elias had pushed his cobbled-together exosuit to its absolute limit. The carbon steel struts groaned under the strain of calibration, servo motors buzzing like angry insects. She swayed, hands gripping the side rails, but she did not fall. Elias hovered nearby, tension wound tight beneath his skin. He'd spent weeks pulling parts from scrap depots, bribing old contacts, and welding components long after the colony slept. Every piece of the frame had a scar, every wire a story. But it worked. She was upright. Kareth's breathing came quick, sharp through her teeth. Her eyes flicked to him, wide and shining, not with fear but with something fiercer. Determination. Easy, he said, crouching beside the stabilizer console. Don't fight it. Let it hold you. She didn't understand the words perfectly, but she caught the meaning in his tone. Slowly, carefully she released the rails. For a moment the entire world held its breath. The servos hissed. Her knees locked. And then she stood. A soft, startled sound escaped her throat. Half laugh, half gasp. Elias grinned despite the exhaustion that clung to him like a second skin. Yeah, he murmured, look at you. Over the following days the workshop transformed. It wasn't just a place to hide anymore. It became a training ground. He rewired and rebalanced the exosuit every night, fine-tuning it to the way she moved. She learned fast. She always had. The girl who'd once been left for dead began to walk, then to move, then to fight the invisible weight that had been placed on her shoulders. At first she stumbled. Every step was a negotiation between pain, balance, and sheer will. But she never gave up. When she fell, she pushed herself up with shaking arms. When the servos failed, she learned to adjust. She wasn't just learning how to walk again. She was reclaiming something her own people had declared lost. Elias taught her the basics of defense, how to shift her center of gravity, how to brace for impact. She mimicked him with uncanny precision, copying every gesture like it mattered. And it did. One night, after she'd managed 3 full circuits of the room without falling, she turned toward him, chest rising and falling with sharp, victorious breaths. She pressed her fist to her heart in a gesture she hadn't shown him before. Her eyes burned. What does that mean? He asked softly. She tapped her chest again, then pointed at him. A vow. Outside the colony was cracking. Protests against alien refugees had turned into armed patrols, safety checks, that were little more than excuses to break down doors. Vale's visits grew colder, more calculated. Elias kept the lights dim and the workshop sealed. Then one evening the ground itself shook. Not from drills or machinery, but from impact. A tremor rippled through the dome. The emergency alarms howled seconds later. Elias ran to the viewport. A black shape pierced the night sky, an angular vessel cutting through the mist, unmarked and fast. Raiders. Not the official military. Not the coalition. Pirates. They'd come before to strip outlying colonies of whatever they could carry, but never this close to the core sectors. He turned toward her. Kareth was already moving, limping slightly but steady. She understood without him needing to explain. The exosuit whirred as she straightened to her full height, a fraction taller than him now. This isn't your fight, Elias said. But even as he spoke, he knew the words were hollow. Her expression hardened. For weeks she had been the one needing protection. Now, finally, she could choose to stand. The first explosions hit the southern gates. The dome trembled again. Over the comm, panicked voices overlapped. Security teams scrambling, citizens fleeing. Elias grabbed the rifle mounted over the workbench. He hadn't touched it since leaving the service, but his hands remembered its weight. "Stay behind me," he said. She tilted her head, then shook it. "No." They moved together through darkened corridors toward the main plaza. Smoke already curled through the air, tinted orange by burning infrastructure. Sirens cast everything in sharp, flickering shadows. Raiders swarmed through a breach in the outer wall, lean figures in black armor, their movements efficient and brutal. Elias ducked behind a fallen support beam, aimed and fired. The shot cracked the night open. Kareth stayed at his shoulder, watching every movement, waiting. When two raiders flanked their position, she moved before he could stop her. The exosuit whirred and struck with surprising force. She drove into the first attacker like a blade, knocking him flat. The second swung a weapon. She twisted awkwardly but fast, catching his arm with a servo-assisted grip and slamming him into the wall. Elias almost forgot to breathe. She stood over the fallen raiders, chest heaving, eyes bright like silver fire. Not helpless. Not abandoned. Not forgotten. He covered her as they moved toward the breach. For every step he took, she matched him with quiet precision. Fear was still there, buried under the surface, but something else burned brighter. As they approached the outer gate, Vale's voice barked over the loudspeakers, ordering citizens to evacuate and stand down. His command structure was fracturing. The raiders were too fast, too well equipped. People were trapped. Elias saw a group of civilians cornered against a loading bay. One raider raised his weapon. Kareth didn't hesitate. She launched forward, servos screaming, and collided with him before the shot fired. The impact sent them both skidding across the floor. The raider was unconscious before Elias even reached them. He caught her arm as she stumbled upright. Her grin, small and fierce, was the first he'd ever seen on her face. They fought their way through chaos together. Elias fired, she struck. Her movements were rough, uneven, but unstoppable. Every blow she landed was a rejection of the night she'd been left to die. By the time reinforcements from the colony's security forces arrived, the raiders were retreating to their ship. Smoke coiled around the breach like a living thing. Elias stood beside her at the broken gate, both of them breathing hard. Her suit was scratched, half the servos overclocked, but she was still standing. Around them, colonists stared. Not at him. At her. The alien girl who had been nothing but rumor and fear, now standing tall against a threat none of them could stop. Kareth met their eyes one by one. No words. Just a single, deliberate gesture, hand pressed to her chest. A promise. A warning. Elias lowered his weapon slowly. For the first time, the colony didn't just see a girl to be feared. They saw a defender. The night was not over. The raiders would come again. Vale would not let this shift in power go unanswered. But something irreversible had taken root here. In her, in him, in the people who had witnessed what they weren't meant to see. Elias looked at her, and she met his gaze, the ghost of that fierce smile still flickering at the edges of her mouth. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was choosing to stand. And now that she could, no one would ever be able to discard her again. The night they returned was darker than the one they'd fled. The raiders' first strike had been a probe. Elias knew that now. A test. They hadn't come to take. They'd come to measure the strength of the colony, to see who would stand and who would break. And now they were back with the answer. Kareth stood at the edge of the inner gate, her exosuit gleaming under the pale perimeter lights. It wasn't the same suit she'd learned to walk in. It had been reforged, rebuilt, adapted to her movements like a second skin. The carbon struts were smoother, the servo response sharper. Elias had worked through exhaustion and pain to get it ready, every bolt a silent promise. Behind them, the colony's militia scrambled into position. Not soldiers, farmers, engineers, freight haulers who'd traded wrenches for rifles. Vale barked orders from the command platform, his voice loud but uncertain. His authority had cracked since the last attack. Elias adjusted the strap of his rifle and glanced sideways at Kareth. Her breathing was steady, her eyes narrowed toward the horizon where the black silhouettes of ships hung like teeth in the night sky. "Once this starts," he murmured, "there's no going back." She didn't answer, but she lifted her hand, the gesture she'd shown him before, fist to chest. Not just for him this time, but for the whole colony behind them. A vow. The sirens wailed as the raiders descended. Dropships sliced through the air, kicking up wind and dust that lashed against their faces. Floodlights swept across the open field. The ground trembled under impact after impact. Elias steadied his weapon. He'd spent years trying to forget how to be a soldier. But tonight, he let the memories return like a tide. The first wave came fast, black-armored figures swarming across the breach with surgical precision. But this time they weren't met with panic. The militia held their lines. Barriers flared with improvised shields. Fire roared from the turrets Elias had rigged days earlier. The night exploded in gunfire and light. Kareth moved like a storm through the chaos. The servos of her suit sang with every step, amplifying her speed and strength. She met the raiders head-on, catching a strike, turning it, sending her attacker sprawling. Two more closed in, she twisted, slammed one into the other, and crushed a weapon under her heel. Elias fought at her flank, the rhythm between them precise and wordless. He covered her openings, she guarded his blind spots. Each time the tide threatened to break through, they pushed back together. Vale watched from the tower, frustration twisting his features. He wanted to command this fight. But the people were no longer looking to him. They were looking at her. The raiders surged again. A demolitions team rolled forward with a breach charge the size of a hover crate. If they got through the second wall, the colony would fall. Elias saw it too late, 3 raiders moving low and fast, shielded by covering fire. Kareth didn't hesitate. She sprinted across the burning courtyard, bullets sparking off her armor. The charge detonator was halfway primed when she crashed into the squad like a blade of living steel. One raider flew backward into a bulkhead. Another swung a blade, catching her shoulder. Sparks burst from the servo joint, but she didn't falter. She ripped the detonator free, slammed it into the ground, and kicked it toward the open field before it could detonate. The blast tore a crater into the dirt harmlessly away from the colony. She staggered, smoke rising from her armor. Elias caught her as she stumbled back toward the barricade. Her breathing was rough, but her eyes were steady. "You're insane," he whispered. Her grin was fierce and tired. "Alive," she breathed, the word foreign on her tongue but clear. Over the comms, Vale's voice cracked through the noise, commanding everyone to fall back, regroup, retreat to the inner core. But no one moved. They followed her instead. The line held. The raiders weren't expecting resistance this strong. Their commander stepped forward at last, a towering figure wrapped in black armor, face hidden behind a jagged mask. He carried a weapon like a scythe, cutting down 2 militia soldiers in seconds as he advanced. Kareth stepped forward. Elias grabbed her arm. "Don't," he hissed. "You're hurt." She turned to him, the gesture she'd given him so many times, fist to heart, now mirrored as she reached for his hand. Not a farewell. A promise. She walked out onto the scorched field alone. The raider commander's steps slowed. A hush rippled through both sides of the battle. She didn't look like the abandoned girl anymore. She looked like a blade sharpened by pain. The commander lunged. She moved to meet him. His strikes were precise, brutal, each one meant to end her in seconds. But she'd learned from pain, not drills. Her movements were unpredictable, feral. She blocked his first strike, let the second glance off the reinforced plates, and twisted inside his guard. Their clash echoed through the battlefield. She ducked under his blade, slammed her elbow into his ribs, kicked out one of his legs. He staggered but didn't fall. He countered with a backhand that cracked against her helmet. Her knees buckled for half a heartbeat, but then she surged forward with a roar that silenced the night. Elias could barely see her through the smoke and fire. All he saw was motion, hers and the commander's, locked in a dance of survival and fury. He wanted to run to her, but he knew he couldn't. This was hers. The commander raised his scythe for the final blow. She caught the haft with both hands, servos screaming, and forced it downward. His armor creaked under the pressure. Her suit flared with warning lights, but she didn't let go. She twisted, spun, and drove the broken blade through his chest plate. The commander fell to his knees, then to the ground. The raiders froze. Kareth stood above him, armor cracked, breathing like fire, and let out a sharp, wordless cry that carried across the field. A sound of someone who had once been left to die and refused to remain forgotten. The raiders broke. They fled to their ships, engines shrieking into the night sky. For a long moment, the battlefield was nothing but smoke and silence. Then someone, one of the militia, raised their fist to their chest, mimicking her gesture. Then another. Then dozens. The sound of rifles striking armor echoed like a heartbeat. Elias walked toward her through the ash. She swayed on her feet, exhausted but unbowed. He caught her before she could fall. She pressed her forehead against his chest, not in weakness but in trust. Behind them, Vale watched from the tower, his authority crumbling into dust. The colony didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to those who stood when it mattered. Elias looked down at her, at the girl who had once been discarded like she was nothing. Now she was their protector. Their symbol. She opened her eyes, silver and burning. "Home," she whispered. He held her tighter. Yeah, he said softly. Home. Above them, the stars burned cold and bright. The night was theirs now, not because they had been spared, but because they had chosen to fight for it together. The war wasn't over. It might never truly be. But something irreversible had been written in this smoke and ash. A bond forged not in mercy but in fire. A girl once abandoned. A man who refused to walk away. A world that had learned who stood with them when no one else would. And somewhere out there, the universe whispered a new kind of fear. Not of monsters, but of what happens when humanity chooses to love what others throw away.